Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'm going to be sharing my top 10 board games designed by Bruno Cathala. Now, Bruno Cathala is one of my personal favorite board game designers of all time, and he is one of the most prolific board game designers in the industry today. He's been at it for over 15 years now, compiling a very impressive resume. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list. My number 10 board game designed by Bruno Cathala is Mundus Novus here, and this here is a co-design with Serge Leger, and that's one thing about Bruno Cathala. Lots of his designs are co-designs, collaborations with other board game designers. In particular, he likes to work with lots of the French designers. And this here with Serge Leger, Mundus Novus, is a card-based game, and in essence, this is a set collection game. We have a nice little nautical theme here, and players are drafting cards and trading cards and taking all these different actions to accrue as many cards as possible. And at the end of the turn, they're going to play cards for either sets of one of each of several different types of goods, or they're going to play cards of the same type in order to gain gold. And gold is a very valuable resource, because once you reach a certain threshold of gold, that's one of the ways you can win the game. But basically, at the end of the round, any card that a player did not use in order to play down those sets is going to be discarded, and they're not going to take those cards with them into the next round. They're only going to be able to keep the cards that they actually played down as sets during that given turn. And over the course of several rounds, players are trying to, again, accrue a certain amount of gold, because that's one of the ways you can win. But the other thing they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to get more unique cards added onto their sets, so that if they can collect one of each of the 10 different types of resources or goods that are included in this game, if they can play down a set of each of those 10, that is going to win them the game. So those are the two possible winning conditions. I think this game plays better at a higher player count. It does say 2 to 6. At 2 players, the game is very flawed. But if you're playing at 3, 4, maybe 5 players, I think that's where the game shines. That's why it's my number 10 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Mundus Novus. My number 9 Bruno Cathala game of all time is Kingdomino Duel. Now, spoiler, Kingdomino is not on my list. I do like the game. I think it's cute. I think it's charming. I think it's aesthetically pleasing. And I think it's a great gateway game. Queendomino, I have not played yet. I do got to get that game to the table, because I think it has a chance of making it onto my top 10 for this list. Kingdomino Duel here is the roll and write edition, basically, of Kingdomino, except this is only a 2-player game, strictly speaking, hence the name Duel. But I find this to be such a improvement on Kingdomino, a great next step and a great alternative to roll and write games. Basically, players are doing the same concepts of Kingdomino, basically building their kingdom, expanding it by tile laying. But in this case, in this game, you're rolling these 4 dice at the beginning of the round, and players are taking turns drafting these dice, and they're going to each end up with 2 dice, and the 2 faces that you pick, they're going to end up comprising your tile, and you're going to place them starting from the center and working your way around. And again, you're trying to lump up and cluster similar terrain types with the crown symbols. In the case of this game here, you got some X's here that represent your crowns, and you're trying to multiply them in order to score as many points as possible. Also, throughout the course of the game, as you draft these different types of dice, these different faces of the die, you're going to cross them off here on the back of this sheet. And once a player reaches the end here, they're going to unlock a specific ability that they will be able to use at any point in the game. So you're kind of racing to complete these as quick as possible in order to capitalize and benefit from those additional special abilities. So it adds a little more nuance than your basic vanilla Kingdomino. And again, if you like the roll and write genre, a game to consider. My number 9 Bruno Cathala game of all time, and again, this is also a co-design with Ludovic Maublanc, Kingdomino Duel. And now we move on to my number 8 game from Bruno Cathala, and this, again, another co-design with multiple collaborators, and that is Jamaica. And Jamaica here is a co-design with Malcolm Braff, Bruno Cathala, and Sebastian Pauchon. And this here is a pirate-themed game where players are basically circling the island of Jamaica, and it's basically a race to the finish. However, winning the race, making it all the way around the map and being the first player to make it to Port Royal doesn't necessarily guarantee you a win. First of all, I love the board here, beautiful artwork here. Making it all the way around the island doesn't guarantee you a win. However, it will grant you 15 points towards that victory. And depending on where you make it, how far you make it on the racetrack, you'll earn a different amount of victory points. So the further along you make it, the more points you'll get. As a matter of fact, there's a threshold here, a little red line, that if you do not cross, you're actually going to lose 5 points. And players are going and trying to partake in a little bit of action program selection. And they're doing this in order to move forward, in order to accrue gold and food, which are very important resources. You need your gold to pay for particular ports when you stop on them. You need your food in order to feed your crew, especially when you land on particular tough spots along the ocean here. And you also need your cannons because you're going to be engaging in battle. And when you land on the same space as another pirate, you guys are going to roll off. You're going to contribute your cannons as modifier tokens to add to your total roll and see who wins. And whoever wins is going to collect the booty, is going to collect the loot from whoever they defeated. And they could take anything from any of their holds on their ship, whether that be gold, food, or cannons. And sometimes players are going to land on these secret caves here with hidden treasure, and they're going to draw a top card from the treasure deck, and it could be an additional ability, or it could be some valuable treasure that's going to give you positive points at the end of the game, or it could be a curse that's actually going to subtract points from you at the end of the game. But none of the other players around the table know exactly what's there. I think it's really cool. The theme really comes out, the artwork, all the stuff going on. My number 8 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Jamaica. And now we move on to my number 7 board game from Bruno Cathala, and that is Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. And here is another co-design with Ludovic Mablanc. I mentioned Kingdomino Duel earlier. Basically, the board has a 3-dimensional element where you actually use the box of the game as a base, and you place all these 3-dimensional pieces in order to create or recreate Cleopatra's palace and garden. And you've got the obelisk here, these 3-dimensional obelisks, and these 3-dimensional sphinx pieces. You got the 3-dimensional throne and footstool of Cleopatra here. And basically you have all of these little spaces here in this garden that you're actually going to be playing a little bit of a polyomino tile lane. I believe this is the first game that really had that kind of element, this polyomino tile lane feature to it. A lot of games have since done it. And basically you're trying to create enclosed spaces here, which will serve as sanctuaries who have a lot of value. And basically players are taking on the role of Cleopatra's architects, and they're collaborating in the construction of her palace and surrounding gardens. However, they are not a team. This is not a cooperative game. You're trying to be the architect who most contributed to the building of Cleopatra's palace and garden. However, along the way, you're taking certain actions that accrue corruption for you. And corruption is represented by tokens hidden in a pyramid, kind of like a screen, private information that no other player has access to. And whoever has the most corruption at the end of the game is going to be fed to Cleopatra's crocodile. And they're not going to even factor in to the game-winning condition, no matter how many victory points they have. So that's something that you want to consider. You do not want to be first at any expense. You want to try to mitigate and manage that corruption, perhaps avoid taking some actions or taking other actions that allow you to get rid of, discard permanently your corruption token. So that's something you're factoring in as you're taking all these decisions. And it's really cool because it has this mechanism where you take half of the deck face up, half of the deck face down, and you shuffle it just like that. And as you reveal cards in the different markets, you're going to have a group of face-up cards and face-down cards. And whenever you draft from a market, you got to take all of the cards in that market. So sometimes you got to factor in what the face-up cards are showing and what the face-down cards are showing, and whether or not you want to take the gamble or whether or not what's already revealed is valuable enough to you. Lots of really cool things, again, from an aesthetic perspective, from a gimmick perspective, from a thematic perspective. All these things really click with me. My number 7 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. And now we move on to my number 6 board game from Bruno Cathala, and that is Dice Town. And this, again, is a co-design with Ludovic Mablanc. It's another game with a very appealing theme to me. I like the pirate nautical theme. I like the Egyptian theme with Cleopatra. And here we've got the romanticized Wild West. And this game is basically a game of poker, but with dice. And that's exactly the main component in this game. Players are going to have a handful of dice, and these dice have different poker faces to them. You have your 10 of hearts, and you have your 9 spades here, and you've got your queen, and your jack, and your king, and your aces here. And players are trying to roll for majorities in particular faces of the die, because they have this board which consists of all the buildings in the city of Dicetown. And if you have the majority in particular types, you're going to capitalize on the benefits that correspond with that building. Also, in the city hall, the mayor is going to grant you access to property cards based on if you had the best overall poker hand, that is 5 of a kind or a straight or a flush or a full house. If you had the best poker hand on a given round, you're going to get access to free property cards, which are worth victory points at the end of the game. Lots of cool things going on, lots of ways of mitigating the dice rolling. The acoustics of this is really neat as you're rolling the dice in these bullet-shaped cups and flipping them over and revealing them one by one. Players, typically speaking, are rolling and locking one die at a time until they complete their hand of 5 cards. Lots of stuff going on, lots of bribing. A player is going to be a sheriff at all times, and not only will the sheriff win 5 victory points at the end of the game if they retain their position, but throughout the course of the game, they're going to determine tiebreakers, and players are going to be offering them gold and dollar bills in order to bribe them and win their favor and get them to vote to their advantage. Lots of really cool, neat things going on with the Wild West expansion. This game has so much things going on and so many options. Very good game for 4 to 6 players. At 2 to 3 player count, it's okay, but that's really where it shines from 4 to 6. My number 6 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Dice Town. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. My number 5 Bruno Cathala game is Kingdomino Duel, and here is a co-design with Antoine Boza and a spin-off of the very popular original Seven Wonders. Now, one of the things that people had a problem with Seven Wonders was the 2-player variant. They found that it didn't really work, and basically Seven Wonders Duel solves that problem. This makes it a very highly functional 2-player only experience, where instead of having a hand of cards that players are passing along in order to participate in a card draft, instead players are drafting the cards straight from the table. But there's a very particular set or lineup for the cards according to the era. There's 3 different eras or 3 different ages, 3 different rounds, just like in regular Seven Wonders. And each of the different rounds has a different configuration of how the cards are lined up. And basically each of these configurations kind of resembles a structure, a building from antiquity. And so that part is really cool, like a pyramid, for example. And basically players have a lineup of face up and face down cards. And as they draft cards one at a time, alternating, taking turns, they are going to uncover some cards and therefore reveal them. But until they uncover those cards and they're not covered and blocked by any other cards on top of them, those cards are not available. So there's a little bit of a game of chicken taking place where you are trying to hold off from picking a particular card at one given moment, because if you do, as soon as you make that next card available, your opponent can greatly benefit from it. So players are trying to stall as much as possible, sometimes in particular cases with certain cards. Now, the cool thing about this game is that not only can you win this game just by having the most victory points, just like in Seven Wonders, but there's 2 alternate ways of victory. There's the military victory. You have this pawn that you're advancing, progressing towards the capital of your opponent, and it's depicted with a little board and a pawn that moves along. And every time players are gaining military cards, they're advancing this pawn. And if you ever make it to the capital of an opponent, that player has lost the game. The player who makes it all the way to the capital is the winner. But so you want to not neglect military. You want to do just enough for military to keep your opponent from making it to your capital. Even if that's not your emphasis and your priority, you want to do that. Another thing is, if players collect a certain amount of science tokens by completing sets of the different science icons, then they're also going to win the game. I believe it's 5 or 6 different tokens that they need to collect in order to win. And that's very tough, but again, if your opponent totally neglects the science then they are going to very likely lose. So you want to do just enough in those two areas so that your opponents cannot get those automatic victories. If those two do not happen, then yes, it will be determined by the player who has the most victory points at the end of the game. Really cool alternative to Seven Wonders. My number 5, Bruno Cathala, Seven Wonders Duel. And now we move on to my number 4 Bruno Cathala game, and that is Yamatai. And Yamatai here with Mark Packian. This here, produced by Days of Wonder, out-of-print game. I do not know why it did not meet the success of other Bruno Cathala games, but it's basically a Japanese-themed game where the board consists of this map of islands here. They're going to be creating little routes with different colored boats. And the different colored boats represent different types of resources. And in order to build buildings here, you're going to have to surround an island with a very particular amount of ships in particular colors. So one building might require 2 green ships, a brown ship, and a gold ship. Another one might require 3 gold ships. So you're going to make sure that all of these islands where you're trying to build are completely surrounded by this particular configuration of ships representing the different goods. And if you do so, then you're able to build the buildings. You're able to place one of your little pieces on top of that island, representing the fact that you've built there. You grab the tile that depicts that building and tells you how many victory points it is at the end of the game. But there's lots of things going on as well. There's these special characters that players are trying to draft, which will not only grant them particular abilities and benefits throughout the course of the game, different ways of scoring victory points at the end of the game, but they're also going to have a base value of victory points that they get you as well. And as these cards go along the way and they're not drafted, each round you're going to add coins on them, and coins also have victory point value, and they also have a in-game value as well. So you're going to be putting all these coins on top of these different character cards. So it's kind of like the Puerto Rico mechanism, whereas cards are not being drafted, the game incentivizes you to draft them in future rounds because of how much coins are accrued on that card. So lots of little things going on. Even the way that turn order is determined for the future rounds as you draft these particular action tiles that are going to choose and determine not only the action that you're going to take in that current round, but it's pretty much going to give you an idea as to what order you're going to finish in the sequence as far as turn order is concerned going into the next round. So sometimes you might want to pass up on an action that's more obvious to you because you want to set yourself up for the next round to have a really good turn. Other times you might be okay with being last in the turn order because that action is just that valuable to you right then and right there. Really cool, beautiful presentation. My number 4 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Yamatai. And now we move on to my number 3 Bruno Cathala, and that is Shadows over Camelot by Serge Leger, and Bruno Cathala. And this here is a King Arthur game where players take on the role of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, and they're trying to fend off a siege of Camelot, not to mention mitigate between the battle of the Picts and the Sacs. They're also trying to go on quests to find the Holy Grail, to find the Excalibur sword in the stone, to find Sir Lancelot's armor. And all of these different quests are basically going to be resolved through card play. And it's kind of like a game of poker, except you're playing cards one at a time, and you're trying to get really, really high pairs of cards, or 3 of a kind, or sometimes a full house. In certain quests, you're trying to just get a successive order of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you got to play them in that exact order. And you're doing this collaboratively, so players are splitting themselves apart and going to different parts of the board, representing the different quests that they're trying to partake in. And each player has a character that has a very unique ability. Now, what adds a twist to this game is the fact that there's a potential traitor, and you could play where you guarantee the fact that there's a traitor, but I play where there's a potential, high likelihood of a traitor, but not necessarily a guarantee. And that traitor is trying to make decisions, purposely so, in order to sabotage the rest of the players, but at the same time, not so obvious so that they don't betray their identity. And basically, eventually, they will reveal themselves, or players will accuse them, successfully so, finding out that they were the traitor all along, and they'll basically take on the role control of the bad guys, or the artificial intelligence, if you will, making sure that little by little they're picking the players apart. Now, players are trying to successfully complete quests in order to put white swords on the round table here, but whenever they fail a particular quest, they're going to also put black swords. And by the time the entire table here is filled, all 12 spaces are filled, you want to have at least 7 white swords in order to win the game. Really cool. I like the theme. I like the artwork. I like the intrigue and suspense as you're trying to figure out who and if there is a traitor. My number 3 Bruno Cathala game of all time, Shadows over Camelot. And now we move on to my number 2. Really like this game. Not quite good enough to be my number 1, but it is Cyclades. And again, this is another co-design by Ludovic Mablanc. Another theme that I really like. I feel that Bruno Cathala is very diverse, not only in his selection of themes, but he's also diverse in his selection of gaming mechanisms. He does not draw from the well too often. He goes and reinvents himself with different types of games. This is, in essence, is a simplified area control war game with a Greek theme, and players are starting the round with an auction for turn order, very similar to a game like Amun-Re, where they're trying to vie for the favor of different gods, and the base pantheon here of gods comes with Zeus, Poseidon, Ares, Athena, and Apollo. And basically, the gods are always going to line up in a different order each round, and the order in which they line up will determine the turn order for that round. So if Poseidon is number 1, not only are you drafting to get Poseidon and his benefits, but you're also drafting to have the first turn in that current round. And each of these different gods provide you different benefits. They give you different advantages, and you want to find the right balance throughout the course of the game of drafting these gods and doing so at an economical rate, because you're doing an auction bid, like I mentioned, for these particular gods, and you don't want to expend all of your resources because lots of your actions are also going to cost you money. So whenever you bid for a particular god, a future person subsequently to you can place their bid on that same god, outbidding you, and you'll immediately be forced to bid for another god right then and there. You cannot surpass the bid of the player who just passed you. So that's something to factor in as you make your initial bid. Sometimes being last in the bidding order is actually an advantage in this game. And basically, you're trying to be the first player to complete 2 metropolises in your islands that you are controlling over, and whoever does that first will be the winner of the game. I am interested. I have the Hades expansion that I will be adding to this game, and I'm curious to see what that does as far as my opinion on this game. But for now, it's good enough to be my number 2 Bruno Cathala, Cyclades. And now we move on to my number 1, the final one for today's list, my favorite absolute Bruno Cathala game of all time, and it is 5 Tribes. And 5 Tribes here, I believe, is actually the only game on this top 10 that was actually a solo design. But how about that? It's my favorite of all Bruno Cathala's games. And this is basically the Mancala game, where players are going to have this modular board, this 6x5 grid depicting different markets and different buildings and areas. And basically, players are going to put these different colored meeples, and one at a time, they're going to pick up their meeples and move them, dropping one off each space that they go along the way until they make it to their final destination. And that last meeple that they drop off in that final tile has to combine or match with at least one other meeple of the same color on that tile in order for it to be a legal move. And when they do so, they're going to get a specific benefit, not only for the colored meeple that they dropped off there, but also they're going to trigger the benefit of that particular tile. And there's so many ways of scoring points in this game. When you empty out a tile altogether, you're allowed to place your camel there, indicating that you have control of that area and that you're going to score those victory points for it at the end of the game. You're also partaking in a set collection, very much like Mundus Novus here, which I mentioned earlier on this list, where if you get one of each of the different types of goods in this set, then you're going to score more points, exponentially more and more points at the end of the game. You also have these special djinns, which are very similar to these special characters that I mentioned in Yamatai, where not only do they give you in-game benefits, but they're also going to score you victory points at the end of the game. Your money, which you're using for a turn, an auction for turn order, very similar to Cyclades, as I mentioned. And again, you got lots of these things that you kind of repeat and you combine and mix and match with other of your board game designs, and they combine very well in this game here. You got this auction for turn order at the beginning of each round, and the money is very valuable because not only does it help you bid for that turn order, but at the end of the game, any leftover money will be victory points for you as well. So lots of really cool, neat things going on in this game. Aesthetically, I like it. Mechanically speaking, I love the Mancala. My number one favorite Bruno Cathala game of all time, 5 Tribes. And that's it for today's list, folks. My 10 favorite Bruno Cathala games of all time. Please comment down below. Tell me what is your favorite Bruno Cathala game. Again, thank you so much for joining us here on Harry Met Board Games. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.